in terms of my research agenda, I mean, that's been the common denominator. I wanted to know in my master's and credentials program how students navigated the world with pedagogies like critical pedagogy and ways of investigating and dismantling systemic oppression, and also drawing from our own positionalities and our ways of knowing the world. And then when I pursued a PhD, my research was about applying ancestral knowledge systems to computer science education, and how might students respond to that weaving of knowledges, for the greater sustainability of the earth and of, cultural pedagogies. And also, in computer science education, how might we engage in computer science education, especially as Indigenous peoples who are the most denied to this field. How might we engage in computer science education as a way of holding computer science accountable? Computer science was born a military child and loves warmongering, approaches, also capitalism, but how often do we pay attention to, where our e-waste is going and what it's doing to the planet, and in whose backyards are we dumping our e-waste in, and how contaminating and harmful that is to communities and to the earth. So by revitalizing ancestral knowledges, from all over the world, because they come back to earth knowledges, we would absolutely pay attention to these things. And we would create computer science in ways that are responsible, in ways that are not warmongering or also capitalist driven, but in ways that hold values that say that the earth is important and that all communities deserve dignity. And so that's how I approach my research, in ways that are not just about producing knowledge, but also about making real changes in the world. And so building community around that is really important for me. Yeah, I mean, in ethnic studies, I've come to realize that there are, three approaches that I am familiar with. One is the approach that understands ethnic studies and wants to learn and is excited about ethnic studies and this holistic approach, this decolonial approach of learning. Another response that I've seen is that they're not really sure, where, what's going on, and if this, ethnic studies is opinion based, or, like they're a little bit skeptical, but they're open to having conversations, and they're open to learning and to having like a two-directional, conversation that benefits, all people. And then there's, a third response, which rejects ethnic studies as an academic discipline, and claims that ethnic studies is incendiary, that it is all opinion based, and that it promotes the overthrow of the American government, and that we should absolutely, ban ethnic studies from schools, which is what happened in Tucson, Arizona, in less than 10 years ago. So the people that I approach when I talk about my research, in ethnic studies and computer science education, I'm interested in speaking mostly to the people who are open, and who also, I invite to push my thinking, and who are doing it in generative and helpful ways. I've also, in computer science especially, mostly experienced, some pretty dehumanizing experiences that reject anything that I had to say as something that's valuable, because of the way that I look, because of my 15-letter name, whatever, I don't know. But it is absolutely very much, even before I open my mouth. So yeah, so I go in mostly as a listener. I'm not interested in, convincing people about anything, proselytizing about something. I can only tell my story and how it has impacted me. I can only, share the research that I've read and the scholars that have influenced me. There are, now that ethnic studies is a requirement on campus, you know, um, there will be probably students in our classes that will feel forced to be there, because it's a law and because it's required. And so, I've had students in the past that absolutely are suspicious about ethnic studies and that are taking it because it's some sort of requirement. But I've also shared with them, you don't have to be here. Here are all the other classes that you can take in lieu of this class that you can still get credit for. We welcome, healthy conversations that are scholarly and that are going to be generative for all of us. And that doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything. It means that, that it takes an amount of, emotional intelligence to engage. And that actually is pretty fruitful and actually very helpful. And so that would be like the middle, people who are open to having a conversation and for, generative conversations. But, people who have an emotional response that rejects, and no matter what you do, will always be, I would say maybe, I don't know, not interested in learning, this approach or these types of approaches. And I guess I'll cross that bridge when I get there, but, I haven't gotten there yet. So setting up systems of support are going to be really important. And that means, building relationships with European American allies. I sometimes have said white people before in the past because that's what I hear all the time, but I want to move away from that because for me, the more that we reify, color-based identities, I think the more we end up in chasing our own tails. Yes, white supremacy is real, and phenotype is absolutely, something that has influenced the ways in which we've, formed our societies. And so we must dismantle it by not using those same tools. We must dismantle anti-Blackness and anti-racist ideologies by not continuing to reify phenotype and race. And so for me, it's about like cultural, land-based, place-based identities that make most sense. So if I were to, one of my friends, she identifies as an Irish American and her family has been here, in the US for like 16 generations. And although she's never visited Ireland, she traces her ancestral lineage to that homeland, and she understands that that's part of her lineage, and she'll identify as that. Therefore, now she can relate to place-based experiences and recognize that this is native land. That she lives amongst the territory that has been cared for by Chumash nations. And that to me is what makes most sense. So we're not reifying racist ideologies, but we're using language and approaches that are actually decolonial, that are anti-racist, and that are looking for ways to connect back to the land. And it doesn't mean that, you go back to the land where you're from. It means that we calibrate our positionalities in relationship to the native peoples of the land in which we live and occupy and are guests on. And that's a different relationship than saying, something like, I'm a white person, period. I mean, it's complicated and I don't have, the perfect solutions or anything like that, but these are just some of my thoughts and conversations that I've had with people that I respect and care about as well.